It all started with the fact that about an hour ago, some incident occurred near the university. The young girl was very surprised when the guy suddenly proposed to her. At first, she didn't understand what he meant, but the guy's friends started making fun of her. The young man knew that the girl was a little confused, but suggested that she look around. Only now did the young girl notice that she was standing in the middle of a heart strewn with 1,000 roses. This realization suddenly made her feel very awkward, but the guy didn't pay attention to her. Instead, he opened the box and showed the magic crystal that he had been trying hard to get from the dungeon. The young man stayed late on purpose to propose and give it to the girl. However, she was more surprised by the fact that her interlocutor was in a dungeon that was not for mere mortals. The man laughed and said that no one else in the entire university could get into the dungeon. However, their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a hooded stranger who ordered the girl to leave. He bent down and began to straighten the flowers because the angle of the bend was crooked and the flower should have been placed the other way. The groom himself was so carried away by the story of his strength and abilities that he completely failed to notice the changes taking place around him. At this time, our main character straightened the flowers and was about to go on with his business. However, it was suddenly established when the young man handed him a ring and asked him to accept his love. The hero was extremely surprised by this state of affairs and even froze for a moment. The groom's friends were upset that their friend had done such a strange thing. Only after a minute of silence did the young man notice that he had accidentally proposed to a complete stranger. After this, he immediately became angry and threw the ring on the ground in front of him. The guy began to look around and search for his beloved. However, it only now dawned on him that the girl had disappeared, taking advantage of this situation. Then the groom started yelling at his friends for letting the girl go. Our hero was only worried that the flowers he had fixed were ruined again. I noticed that if everything is so neglected, then recognition cannot be successful in any case. After this, the hero leaned down and wanted to straighten the flowers, which made the groom very angry. The guy was beyond his strength, so he didn't hesitate for long and immediately hit the stranger in the face. Our hero was surprised by this because he did not expect an attack from the outside at all. It was a strong enough blow that it sent the guy flying back and falling to the ground. The groom was angry that his proposal failed because of a stranger. That's why he started beating up the guy who just wanted to help and fix the flowers. The beating lasted for some time. The groom was supported by his friends. Still, the guys decided to stop so as not to accidentally kill the guy. After that, they just laughed at such a weakling and went about their business. Our hero thought he was going to die. He was cold. He couldn't even move his fingers. However, something suddenly happened and the guy suddenly stopped feeling pain. Suddenly, everything around seemed to become dark and a bright light appeared right before the hero's eyes. At first, he thought it was some kind of hallucination, but everything looked very similar to the information window from the game. Meanwhile, the same failed bride and her bodyguards ran back to the scene of the incident. During her escape, the girl saw that the stranger was being attacked, so she wanted to help him. However, now they ran up and saw no one around, only flowers lying on the ground. The bodyguards even doubted the girl's words, but the flowers said otherwise. The defense suggested that the boys left the flowers and candles and walked away. There were no bloodstains on the ground. It was very suspicious, but another bodyguard noticed that it was time for the girl to return home. She agreed with them, but asked the guys to check the information about this incident tomorrow. After this, the bride went home, never knowing what had really happened. And by this time, our hero returned to his home and was sitting on the bed. He had been seeing the information window in front of him for a long time and could not get rid of it. Even if he hid under the bed, it would appear right from under the sheets. You can close pop-up windows in the browser, but this didn't work. Even if the guy closed his eyes, he could still see this window right in front of him. There were a huge number of pop-up windows that notified about the presence of unread messages. After the young man looked at his status, looked at his skills, he was able to close all the pop-up windows. Only after that he got tired of it, threw himself down, covered himself, and sighed with relief. The hero was incredibly happy that all the messages had disappeared, because his head was already starting to hurt. However, the guy did not understand what had happened to him because he was beaten for real, and after this window appeared, he completely recovered all his injuries. Just as he thought this, another new window appeared right in front of his face. The hero immediately jumped up on the bed and was very disappointed by his return. He was annoyed by the appearance of 3 new notifications, but he still decided to look at them one by one. Only after watching could the guy close all the pop-up windows and move on with his life in peace. Just as he was rejoicing at his freedom, the notification window appeared in front of him again. The hero thought that it was his imagination, which would pass immediately after he had a good night's sleep. That's why the young man turned back into bed, covered himself with a blanket, and went to sleep. It was around midnight when the hero tried to sleep, and there was a notification hanging in front of his face. After 2 hours, the picture had not changed at all, except that the young man still could not fall asleep. I got out of bed, terrified that I couldn't close the notification and relax. He was annoyed that it didn't disappear, so the guy decided to take a look. Sleepy, with huge dark circles under his eyes, he opened the message. It said that the guy had one newbie task available. To complete the task, it was necessary to achieve 10% mastery in performing one specific movement. Since childhood, the hero hated such reminders of uncompleted tasks, and unread messages irritated him. However, he had no choice. The guy decided that if he completed the task, everything would be fine. The guy didn't understand why the app was bothering him so much because it was just a basic technique. However, what was strange was that he began to feel that power was filling his fists. The force, angle, and correct posture of the blow instantly formed in his mind. The guy began to repeat the movement over and over again just to complete the task. At 2 a.m., he started training and performed the movements through pain, sweat, and fatigue. This continued all night. Only in the morning, the guy was able to breathe calmly and sit down to rest. He immediately looked out of his window to check how he had completed the task. Tony hated leaving things unfinished, so he decided to finish this one and worked on it until school started. Upon arrival, his girlfriend immediately attacked him, noticing that the guy had received a bad grade. They argued again because the hero was selective about his grades. Tony was already getting good grades in math, but he wanted to get the maximum score because he was not satisfied with the rest of his subjects. Then a classmate suggested that the guy come over to her place and study English together. However, he refused and said that he could not study other subjects until he got a perfect score in the previous one. The friend was not happy with this answer, but she did not expect anything else. That same evening, our hero had his order delivered right to his door. It turned out to be a large punching bag, which the guy installed himself. Immediately after installing the new equipment, the young man decided to try it out. He put on special gloves and began to further practice basic techniques. This went on for several days in a row until Tony had ruined all the bags he had ordered. During this time, even his special gloves were completely worn out, and abrasions appeared on the guy's hands. However, he was happy and smiling, hoping that he had achieved 100% completion of the task. However, I was shocked when I saw that I could only complete the task when I reached 300% and moved on to the next level. Just at this time, his girlfriend, who was worried about him, knocked on his door. Tony hadn't shown up at school for a few days, so she decided to visit him at home. As soon as he opened the doors, the girl immediately saw that he looked like all the life had been sucked out of him. At that very moment, Tony fell exhausted onto the girl's shoulder. The friend was a little confused by the guy's unexpected behavior, but she understood him. The first thing she decided to do was feed her friend and give him a good rest. They sat together in the establishment and waited until the hero could eat. Because of his illness, the young man was forced to lay out all his things in perfect order before using them. Immediately after this, he began to very quickly absorb food one after another. The girl looked at him and was glad that she had such a good friend. Tony ate all the food and sat back on the couch, rubbing his stomach. Immediately after this, he reminded him that he did not like to remain in debt and asked how he could repay him for the food. The girl couldn't answer right away, so she asked for a little time to think. She looked to the side, killing slot machines, and asked for one toy as a token of gratitude. Tony agreed to this, so the young men stood up, paid, and headed to the slot machines. The young man was extremely focused and emitted a very powerful aura. He gathered energy for a while, then suddenly opened his eyes and rushed to attack. Tony handled the slot machine like a pro, grabbing the toys with ease. The schoolgirl was amazed at how professionally the guy played. However, she was annoyed when the very first toy suddenly fell and did not reach the exit. However, Lucy stopped and said that this was her friend's special plan. After 5 minutes, the girl herself was convinced that the guy was deliberately stacking the toys on top of each other at the very edge. The schoolgirl didn't understand what the point was in putting toys in a row if you couldn't even take them out. However, he did not listen to her completely and asked his friend which of these rabbits she wanted to get. However, the girl was already planning to impress the schoolgirl, so she told him to pull out absolutely all the rabbits for her. After this, the hero took on the most important task. He deftly controlled the toy, and the schoolgirl stood next to him and prompted him. With one movement, our hero sent the toy into a circular rotation. Then he took aim, released his claws, and used his last toy to knock down all the previous hairs. They all fell together into a cell from where they could be taken out and kept for oneself. Lucy and Tony were very happy with their victory. The schoolgirl was very impressed with her skills. My friend said that she is keeping one rabbit for herself and can give all the others to the girl. The schoolgirl was very grateful for such a wonderful gift and happily accepted it. After this, the friends said goodbye to the girl and went home. Lucy hugged the rabbit tenderly to her chest and enjoyed the atmosphere. She hesitantly asked Tony if it was true that he had recently been beaten up by a bully. However, the guy replied that she shouldn't think about it. Nothing terrible had happened. He walked the girl to her house and said that he would not go upstairs with her. He also reassured his friend and promised that he would definitely come to school tomorrow. After this, the guy said goodbye to Lucy and left her alone with the rabbit. A whole night passed and a new day came when Tony promised to return to school. At the entrance, near the fence, stood that same hooligan with his friends and laughed. The subordinates heard that the boy they beat did not die, but did not go to school for several days. A young girl appeared in front of them, ordering the hooligans never to touch that guy. At first, the bandits didn't even understand how to react to the fact that some schoolgirl was threatening them. However, they then burst out laughing because the girl imagined herself to be someone important. The main bully stepped forward and said that whoever threatened him would face consequences. He leaned over the girl and said that he would forgive her this time only because she was very sweet. However, he then tried to grab her and said that the schoolgirl should come and play with them. At that time, Tony returned to school as if nothing had happened and was walking down the corridor. Classmates looked at the boy and discussed rumors that he had recently been beaten. However, Tony did not pay attention to these conversations and first of all went to the restroom. There he calmly washed himself and looked at his reflection in the mirror to tidy himself up. A skill window was displayed before his eyes, indicating that his skills had been increased due to the completion of the task. Suddenly, the same hooligans who had beaten up the guy a few days ago entered that very toilet. They recognized the schoolboy who had disturbed them a few days ago. The hooligans did not expect to meet the guy in such a place, so they believed that the world really is a small place. In the hands of one bully, Tony saw the rabbit he had recently won for Lucy. He immediately guessed that this rabbit clearly did not come from a machine gun. The hooligan admitted that he recently met with his friend who dared to threaten him. Tony got angry because it really was Lucy's doll. Before he had time to come to his senses, the bully was already about to start another fight with him. The guy pressed his left fist to his chin and thrust his right fist forward. However, this time Tony easily managed to dodge at the last moment and avoided the blow. After countless training sessions, these blows seemed to him to be quite mediocre and weak. The hero took a couple of steps back and assumed a fighting stance to defend himself. The bully was amazed that the guy still wanted to fight him, so he ordered all his subordinates to attack simultaneously in order to finish him off faster. The boys obeyed their commander and rushed to attack the hero from all sides. However, Tony has not been training for nothing for the last few days. They are a threat to him. He pulled his left fist back, then turned his body and thrust it forward sharply. The guy hit the bully with such force that he instantly lost several teeth. Immediately after that, he flew back several meters and fell to the ground. Before his subordinates had time to come to their senses, the schoolboy began to beat up the bully further. He struck blow after blow completely without holding back his strength. Tony beat all the hooligans unconscious and stopped only after that. Only at this moment, the leader said that the guy had misunderstood everything. However, before he could finish speaking, he lost consciousness along with his subordinates. It turned out what really happened yesterday afternoon when Lucy came to the hooligans. The girl was far from weak, so she was not afraid at all and attacked first. It was during the fight that her beloved rabbit broke away and got lost somewhere in the yard. So now the girl was sitting in class and reproaching herself for having managed to lose Tony's gift. She explained to her classmate that she had lost her very important doll on the way. At that moment, the class monitor entered the classroom and said that some guy was looking for Lucy. The girl raised her head and saw her friend Tony standing next to her. She was very happy to see him, so she immediately perked up. The girl jumped up and ran to meet Tony, which greatly surprised her classmates. The guy said he heard that she was looking for trouble with some hooligans the previous night. The guy reached forward and gave the girl her pink rabbit. Lucy was very happy about the return of her missing item and thanked the guy. However, he immediately asked her to be more careful because he would not be able to return it so quickly next time. However, Lucy was not worried because she understood perfectly well that she could ask her friend for another new one. Immediately after this, Tony said goodbye to the girl and headed towards the exit of the educational institution. At this time, he learned that he had moved to a new level and the next stage of the task was about to appear. However, the guy was upset by the fact that before starting a new level of the task, it was necessary to complete the intermediate training. Especially for this purpose, he decided to go to the sports center of their city. In the boxing gym, the guy decided to train combination punches, which were much more difficult than regular exercises. His left uppercut was already 300% developed, so he needed to move on. First, he decided to practice the right uppercut, then move on to combination punches. His energy returned. The boy was more concerned that his OCD had worsened. The girls in the gym were discussing the newcomer, who had been training for the third day in a row. Besides them, the sports guys who were involved in boxing here also paid attention to him. One of them was particularly interested in the newcomer who had attracted so much attention. He watched closely as Tony practiced his punches over and over. Suddenly, the guy decided to interfere with his training and came close to the bag. The hero was very surprised by the appearance of a stranger who interrupted his training. This boxer told the hero that he was doing the exercises incorrectly. It was the city's first hard boxing champion who wanted to teach the boy real boxing. However, Tony needed to continue to improve his punching skills, so he asked the champion not to interfere with him. The athlete was furious at being rejected and told to leave. Vanessa was at home playing a keyboard instrument. Her fingers fluttered over the keys, and their translation produced a beautiful melody. Suddenly, her training was interrupted by an employee who entered the office and addressed his mistress. The man apologized for the intrusion and noted that he had found the person the girl had spoken of. This changed everything immediately, so Vanessa broke away from what she was doing and decided to follow him. And at this time, the boxing champion, irritated by the newcomer's refusal, challenged him to a fight. Tony was surprised that this athlete was going to arrange a fight with him. However, the man said that he was not going to fight the guy, but to teach him real boxing. All the people present around them were surprised by this turn of events. At this time, Vanessa Fan entered the boxing hall, surprising everyone present. Champion saw the main star of his school, so he wanted to show off in front of her. Without any further warning, he suddenly got into a fighting stance and swung his fist. Tony barely managed to block before his opponent's blow fell on him. The champion was very surprised that the guy managed to block his punch. Tony noticed that during a real fight, his progress increased faster, so he began to egg the champion on. The athlete was a little embarrassed that the guy was not afraid of him and openly rushed into battle. The spectators were also not thrilled that the champion would have to compete with a newcomer. Vanessa also noticed that Tony was able to withstand the wrestler's blow with ease. The fight became more and more interesting when new spectators appeared in the hall. Vanessa, Tony, and the gym champion turned their attention to the one who had just entered. It turned out to be the great fighter brother Bin, nicknamed Tiger. The man was inspired by the fight between the two guys, so he wanted to join them. In fact, this brother was not in the hall by accident. It all happened because of one evening. The guy was in his club when that same hooligan asked him for help. He offered him a ring as payment for Bean to take care of one guy. The fighter was impressed that in gratitude for his help, he was offered a ring with a magic crystal, which was difficult to obtain. The hooligan admitted that he bought it for $200,000 on the underground black market specifically to show his respect. His honesty greatly amused Bin, so he decided not to hold back his emotions. The guy grabbed the bully tightly around the neck and promised to fulfill his request. Therefore, the audience knew perfectly well that the opponent of the bandit Bin was practically doomed to defeat. The champion wanted to protect his hall and everyone present, so he stepped forward towards it. However, the bandit did not want to listen to this guy, so he ordered him to fly off the road. Instead, he asked those present who Tony was and where to find him. Only now did it dawn on everyone that the bandit had come into the hall not just like that, but for a specific person. Those present were very surprised that it turned out to be that very newcomer. Bin immediately realized that everyone was paying attention to this skinny guy for a reason, and turned to him. Tony showed no fear and asked why Bean was looking for him. The guy admitted that he didn't want to create problems, but in gratitude for some help, he was promised a ring with a magic crystal of the dungeon. Vanessa and Tony immediately recognized the very ring with which the bully proposed to the girl. Meanwhile, the bandit ordered his assistants to surround Tony and not let him escape. The guys with bats immediately obeyed the order and stood on both sides of the hero. The champion tried to protect the boy and said that on school grounds he was responsible for the safety of everyone present. However, the bandit did not even let him finish his sentence and immediately hit him. It was completely against the rules and very cruel, so the audience screamed in horror. The champion fell to the floor, and the bandit was about to finish him off from above with his fists. However, at the last moment, Tony stopped his fist with one hand and told him that he should only attack him. Bean wasn't about to fight by all the rules, so he reached into his pants for his hidden weapon. He pulled out an iron pipe and tried to hit the hero with it with all his might. However, the guy successfully dodged the blows and retreated back. The bandit was terribly irritated by this, so he decided to call on his strength to help and tore his shirt with his muscles. The guy could use magical techniques, so now he was concentrating all his power in the pipe. Suddenly, from a small stub, it turned into a real long, sharp spear. Everyone present was very surprised that the pipe stub suddenly grew larger and did not understand what was happening. In fact, Bandit was called the sixth king of weapons for his abilities. Vanessa's assistant noticed that this guy was gifted, but he had not fully awakened his ability. Several decades ago, the world suddenly changed and various monsters began to appear. Some people began to discover superpowers in themselves to overcome them. It was precisely these people who were called gifted, thanks to their suddenly discovered powers. Superpowers can only be awakened once and are divided into levels from the weakest to the strongest. Moreover, gifted ones who have reached the highest rank are capable of becoming the supreme ruler of all humanity, surpassing all ruling classes. A traveling sorcerer told Bin that as long as he grew stronger, he would be able to go beyond the capabilities of the gifted. Therefore, the power of awakening gave him a strong physique and the ability to strengthen weapons. That's why the guy was so confident in his abilities and attacked the newcomer without hesitation. He used his internal energy, which allowed him to apply the skills. The champion watched the fight between the opponents and was impressed that the newcomer was able to cope with what even he could not withstand. However, he wanted to help the guy and shouted to him that the bandit was attacking with the intent to kill. Tony has been able to dodge all the blows quite successfully so far. However, the guy wasn't going to just stand there and dodge forever. He waited for the right moment and decided to counterattack his opponent. The first thing Tony did was strike Bean's weapon itself, knocking it out of his hands. Immediately after this, the guy swung a second time to attack the enemy himself. The champion was surprised to see that the newcomer had completely adopted his fighting style. Everything happened very quickly, so in a few moments the hero managed to hit the bandit in the chest several times. With his final blow, he was able to break the bandit's spear and simultaneously complete his intermediate combination training. However, this was not enough for the guy, so he continued to strike his opponent, raising his level of perception of physical fitness higher and higher. Tony masterfully practiced punches with both hands, reproducing everything he had learned during training. The last blow was especially powerful, knocking out his opponent. Tony only stopped after she completed the intermediate combination workout at 300%. The young man's amazing strength made the bandit think that he was one of the awakened ones. He even thought that this newcomer belonged to the Fan family fighters. However, Tony replied that he had no idea what Bean and his company were talking about. Bean admitted that he had lost his fight and was planning to retire from the boxing gym. His assistants helped him and led him by the arms because the boy was not able to move independently. And Tony, as if nothing had happened, adjusted his punching bag and was about to continue training. Vanessa was impressed by this fight, thinking that the guy was hiding his true strength. The girl went back to her room but ordered the employee to watch the guy. After this, everything returned to order, and the spectators went to their places to continue their activities. At this time, the bandit was impressed that he had met a real gifted person. The guys were heading to their club when suddenly a stranger appeared behind them and asked them to stop. He showed his ID, and it turned out that the guy in the suit belonged to the Fan family. At one time, Bin dreamed of getting into the House of Fun, but was refused because he was not fully awakened. The man in the suit warned that the boy had broken the rules of the Awakening Association, but the first time he would only receive a warning. After some time, Tony finished his workout and walked out of the gym into the street. Vanessa was already waiting for him there, and she approached the guy and spoke to him first. She said she wanted to thank him for his help a few days ago. However, the hero looked as if he had seen the most terrible creature in the world. He tried to get away from the girl and not look at her, not talk to her. Vanessa wasn't very pleased that the guy looked like he'd seen something nasty. She decided to ignore him and introduced herself to him, thanking him for his help. However, Tony didn't listen to her at all. All his attention was focused on something else. He looked at the girl's green blouse, which flashed before his eyes. The guy was irritated by the fact that the neckline of her blouse was asymmetrical. Tony resisted the urge to reach out and straighten him out. Vanessa did not notice his suffering and asked why the guy was behaving like that. After a while, Tony couldn't hold back and screamed loudly. Immediately after this, he extended his hand to the girl and placed it on her shoulder. The guy straightened the girl's blouse, but she had already managed to misunderstand his actions. Vanessa swung her arm and slapped our hero with all her might. The girl was very angry that the guy dared to touch her body without her permission. And at this time, the girl's bodyguards were watching them from the bushes. They were ready to intervene in their conversation, but they held back with all their might. Vanessa screamed loudly at Tony for daring to touch her like that. However, he made a disgusting expression on his face and told the girl to stop dressing like that. Vanessa misunderstood his words and remarked that what she wore was none of his business. However, she decided to give the guy a chance to explain himself, since he had once helped her. But Tony decided not to use it, simply turning around and walking away. Vanessa was furious that this guy had groped her and then dared to ignore her. The girl immediately turned to her bodyguards for help and ordered them to watch the guy. After everything that happened, the hero was happy to just walk calmly through the city. During the last training session, the guy's perception and physical fitness improved by several levels. Tony noted that real combat has the advantage of allowing you to improve your skills faster. However, immediately after this, he receives a new task that needed to be completed. Also, the guy recently noticed that the stronger his disorder, the faster his perception, the faster he increases his level. He also discovered that using perception, he could usually learn new skills simply by observation. Thanks to this, his skills can improve many times over. Tony felt like there was no limit, and he could exceed his 100% limit several times in a row. If he continues to train, he may even exceed his plan by 300%. The guy had no idea what this system was or what it wanted from him, but he believed that he could go beyond it and free himself from pop-up notifications. To complete this task, he needed to prepare properly and try to complete all the tasks as quickly as possible. Because of this, Tony created his own daily routine and started training at 5 a.m. Then he would take a shower and do housework until 8 a.m. The guy also got himself a special planner to mark the completion of all his daily tasks. Only after the plan was fully completed could the guy breathe a sigh of relief and go about his business. This time, too, the young man completed his morning routine and headed towards the elevator. There he was met by an old woman neighbor who asked if the guy had closed the door before leaving. This triggered a new fad in his head, and Tony felt as if he had been electrocuted. He immediately rushed back into the apartment to check whether he had really closed the door. The guy was convinced of this, then went to school, and only there was he able to breathe a sigh of relief. Suddenly, a group of guys from the boxing gym who had been bothering him recently appeared right in front of him. However, instead of fighting, they suddenly bowed to him and greeted him. The champion announced that the members of their boxing club had unanimously chosen Tony as their new leader. They announced it to everyone and hoped that their new leader would lead them to a bright future. But to Tony, it looked like they were attacking him and constantly demanding something. So the guy asked to leave him alone and tried to run away. On the way, he met his friend Lucy, who greeted him cheerfully. However, Tony walked past her, trying to hide from the crowd of boxers. The school children were already discussing rumors that this guy was the heir to 4 families. The hero tried to hide from his pursuers around the corner and did not understand when he became so unlucky. Suddenly, strange men approached him and introduced themselves as envoys of the Fan family. They handed him an invitation to join the training squad for the Awakened. The men explained that after the monsters awakened several years ago, the world was no longer so safe. That's why they invited the guy to join them, but he was interested in something else. Tony wanted to know what he would get in return for his participation in their club. The strange men in front of Tony immediately opened the box in which the offerings for him lay. It was a perfect set of blades, perfect color, perfect shape, even perfect size. Our hero didn't want to refuse such a wonderful gift, so he grabbed it. Tony promised to think about the Fan family's offer to join them. Immediately after this, the guy said goodbye to the strange man, took the chest, and went about his business. Suddenly, a notification appeared in front of him that the guy had crossed some strange barrier and energy fluctuations had been detected. The notification said that there were enemies around him and that he needed to prepare for battle. Tony looked around but saw only one man in traditional clothing in front of him. He immediately realized that there was something clearly wrong with this guy in front of him. However, before Tony could finish his thought, he felt danger from behind. The boy grabbed his new chest more tightly and turned around sharply. Behind him, Tony saw a huge snake that was about to attack him. The strange man in traditional attire was not at all surprised. On the contrary, he looked animated. The enormous snake did not waste any time and immediately attacked our hero. The guy barely managed to dodge at the last moment, and his chest fell, opened, and the blades scattered. The notification in front of the hero's eyes indicated that he was being attacked by a D-level python. Tony attempted to escape, but was stopped by an artificial barrier that was impossible to overcome due to his lack of B-rank power. Meanwhile, the huge snake continued to attack our hero, ignoring his attempts to escape. In addition to physical attacks, the snake emitted a poisonous mist from its throat. Tony was only able to avoid defeat thanks to the protective function of his gloves, which he had received as a reward earlier. Thanks to the fact that the protection was activated, the guy realized that he was real. Only now did he realize that all this was not an illusion, but a real battle. So the guy tried to avoid as many injuries as possible, constantly dodging. The strange man knew that they were actually now in a magical trap, which was located tens of miles from the school. Therefore, the monster was also real, and one had to either fight it or die. The man wondered how long this guy could last in battle. For a while, Tony tried to dodge, but quickly realized that he needed to go on the offensive. The guy tried to use his well-practiced blow and attacked the snake. However, her skin was so strong that he couldn't even pierce it. Instead, Tony had to retreat again and take a few steps back. The guy looked closely at his hand and noticed that his trained fist was covered in blood. This snake had good defensive armor, so he needed a weapon. Suddenly, the guy remembered that he had recently been given new blades. Tony decided to take advantage of them and immediately rushed back to the box that was lying on the ground. The hero instantly grabbed the first blade he came across in his hand and prepared to attack. He understood that he wouldn't be able to escape from this place, but he could try. After which, the guy pushed off the ground and tried to thrust the blade into the snake's body. He tried to break through the monster's scales again and again, but he couldn't do it. The man watching the fight realized that the guy was about F rank or even less, so he didn't understand at all why this weak guy had attracted the attention of their commander. Tony still couldn't break through the monster's scales, but he noticed that he was developing again in a real fight. At first he was scared, now he doesn't want to fight with this giant. If he continues and uses his perception, he will be able to find out her weaknesses. The guy concentrated and saw the snake's weak spot, attacking right at it. This time he managed to break through the scales, but it was not enough. The snake only became even more angry and began to attack our hero with greater zeal. Suddenly, that same strange man intervened in the schoolboy's fight and stopped him. He ordered the boy to pay attention to the monster behind them. It took the man a few seconds to deal with the monster and remove the barrier. As soon as Tony landed on the ground, the environment around him began to return to its original state. The guy immediately realized that the man in front of him was incredibly strong. He was able to defeat the monster Tony was fighting with one precise blow. His gaze fell downwards, and the hero noticed that the blades from the suitcase were scattered in a chaotic manner. Because of his illness, the hero immediately rushed to straighten them so that they lay flat. At this time, a man came closer and introduced himself as the director of the personnel department of the Fang family's training squad, named Fang Dong. The man looked at the boy's stunned face and thought that he had managed to impress him. However, in reality, the matter was in the unusual illness of our hero. In his opinion, the man's previous blow, which killed the monster, was truly perfect. For a guy with OCD, they seemed like the pinnacle of perfection. The hero was impressed by this and wanted to be able to deliver such perfect blows. That was why he wanted to join the Fan family's training squad, to find the ideal model of strength there. Tony just wanted to get rid of this strange system as quickly as possible, but the man didn't know this at all and was surprised. Meanwhile, Lucy was running across the schoolyard looking for her friend, who didn't even say hello to her. The girl saw her friend from afar, who was standing opposite another man. Lucy immediately recognized the director of the Fan, who was a very famous person in the city. She heard her friend and the director agreeing on something for the next day. After the man left, the girl came out from around the corner and turned to her friend. She asked if the guy was really okay if his family was looking for him. Tony replied that he was fine, after which Lucy hugged him tightly. The girl was worried that Tony had suffered some internal injuries because he had run so fast. However, at that moment, the hero only dreamed that the girl would move away from him at least a meter. He hated it when people invaded his personal space. The mere thought of being surrounded by a crowd of people made the guy feel sick. Although Tony noticed that Lucy looked absolutely clean and didn't irritate him as much. The girl promised to protect her friend if others started to bother him. Lucy didn't like it when Tony started lecturing her to be careful. Last time she went to look for a bully, so she could well have gotten into trouble. During their conversation, someone was watching the couple from around the corner and eavesdropping. Tony asked Lucy how she knew about the Fan family because he himself had never heard of it before. A friend told me that the Fan family is one of the 4 top clans that has become a supplier of dungeon resources for the Ministry of Defense. It is a force to be reckoned with, controlling 10% of all the city's resources. Just at this time, the heiress of the Fan family arrived at the administrative building and was getting out of the family car. It was the same Vanessa who had just recently introduced herself to our hero. This time, the girl was dressed more formally and was heading out on business. She entered the building accompanied by one of her bodyguards and headed to the head office. Fang Dong couldn't stop looking at his mistress and how graceful she looked. The girl asked the master how his meeting with Tony went recently. The man noticed that the boy agreed to join them, but his strength was rather useless and not worthy of attention. He tried to offer to introduce the girl to some worthy newcomers, but she rejected him and ordered him to keep an eye on the guy. Vanessa reminded that the master should not allow beginners to be lazy. They should not be thoroughly prepared. Vanessa hoped that things would get a lot more interesting once Tony showed up at their training camp. The master turned to the newcomers and said that the lady was equally interested in everyone, so everything depended on their diligence. He began to command them and told them what to pay special attention to. He also emphasized how beautiful his young mistress's gait was. The man praised Vanessa so much that she heard it and began to worry. Because of this excitement, the girl could not concentrate and accidentally twisted her leg. She was saved from falling by one of the bodyguards who appeared nearby in time. However, even this situation was presented by the master as if the lady was too perfect for this world. On one of the top floors of a high-rise building, a man stood in his office and looked out over the city. It was the head of the family, Fan Dillon, who was waiting for the arrival of his daughter. A few moments later, the door to his office opened and Vanessa herself entered. The man did not understand why his daughter wanted to go to a regular school, being so wealthy. However, the girl noticed that she was not an awakened huntsman, so she was just an ordinary girl. Father remarked that she would become the boss, and the manager should not worry about power. The man has already found those who will support the girl in the future. He heard that his daughter had recently become interested in a particular person and had sent a master to find him. Vanessa said that the master volunteered himself and even sent a monster to test the newcomer. She personally watched as the boy passed the tests and agreed to join the ranks of the Fan family. That is why the girl felt that Tony would be stronger than she seemed at first glance. A few days later, the weekend arrived, and many people gathered at the Fan family's training field. Our hero, Tony, was one of those newcomers who came there for the first time. There were a lot of people around him wearing a variety of clothes. They all had weapons with them that looked very expensive. Tony felt it was best for him to keep his distance, as some of these people looked dangerous. The talk around him was that all the resources in the dungeon were controlled by the 4 major clans, which was why there were so many people wanting to join the ranks. Tony walked forward a little and got his waiting number from one of the administrators, after which everyone who received a serial number was asked to go through a selection process. This is how your rank should be determined, which is fixed, and very few can fully awaken their abilities. Most awakened ones receive the lowest level, of which only 1% are people with abilities of rank D and above. S-rank hunters, some of whom are strong enough to rule an entire country. Here, in reality, their city's army is under the command of a foreigner, the only S-rank hunter in Bonnie City. Gradually, the huge queue diminished, and finally our hero approached the determining device, and he was asked to bring his hands closer so that it could test his strength. A few moments later, the ball announced that our hero was a rank F huntsman and had no employment. Levels below D are considered very weak, so no classes are provided for them. The higher ranks are divided into warriors, mages, archers, assassins, spellcasters, and healers. Tony watched as people around him were happy or sad about their newly acquired rank. However, he still envied even those who received E rank because his was the lowest. Suddenly, the crowd began to shout joyfully, which attracted the attention of our hero. It turned out that one of the new recruits had achieved a D-level rank, which was very rare. It was a young, strong guy in metal armor who was descending the stairs. There were envious people all around him, but Tony was worried about something. And he looked at the information board and thought about how strong he would become if he completed the remaining 99% of the task. Immediately after this, all the new recruits, including the hero, went to the recruit training center. There, they were told that they were all dressed in uniforms and were becoming new recruits for the Fan family. From that moment on, the man promised to become their teacher in the use of various types of weapons. Legend has it that in ancient times there was a unique martial art that could channel internal power. By concentrating it inside the sword, recruits will be able to hit a target several miles away. He added that although those gathered were awakened, their abilities were nothing compared to the legendary power. But along with their abilities, the true power of the awakened lies in how they handle their weapons. Differences in angle, force, and speed can affect the destructive power of an impact. Immediately after these words, the man concentrated and made one quick strike with his sword. It didn't look very strong, but it was strong enough to cut all the tubes several times. The blow was so perfect that it completely impressed our hero. The other recruits gathered there were also amazed by the fencing skill of their master. What was even more surprising was that their teacher was not a fighting type, but a magician. However, what impressed our hero most now was precisely the perfect and precise blows this man delivered. It seemed that he could handle absolutely any weapon that existed in this world. He demonstrated strikes with an axe, a spear, katanas, swords, and other weapons. Absolutely every mastery of the instrument was achieved at an incredible level. After the demonstration, all the newcomers went directly to the hall for weapons training. There, they practiced their skills, but many of them quickly became exhausted. Some of the recruits were of the magical type and saw no point in owning weapons. However, Master Dong heard their words and said that the boys were deeply mistaken in their reasoning. He noticed that without weapons skills, they wouldn't get into even the weakest team, so he sent everyone to train. Although the recruits went on to practice, not all of them did so. Among the newcomers, there was one strange guy who tirelessly practiced the same punch. This was our hero, who was forced by the system to repeat the same blow over and over again. The guy even closed his eyes on purpose so as not to see the notification every minute. He repeated the stance and punched relentlessly until the notification disappeared. The guy was incredibly exhausted, but his illness was stronger than his fatigue. He felt that he was only a short step away from achieving the ideal, so he continued to train. Finally, Tony put all the strength he had left into one of the blows. It was very difficult. After a long training session, the guy's hands were shaking from fatigue. Luckily, it was at this moment that the guy achieved the perfect execution of the stand and was able to improve his level. And the rest of the newcomers watched our hero and did not understand why such a weak guy was practicing his punches so diligently. However then, without much delay, our hero took up a new type of weapon. He only stopped when he reached the maximum level of mastery of a new type of weapon. The last one on the plan was the medieval sword, but the elder one did not show the perfect attack, so the hero had to learn it himself. A week passed, during which each of the recruits had to find a suitable weapon and demonstrate their experience in using it. Most of the newcomers immediately rushed into the fighting hall to demonstrate what they had learned during this time. However, there was one newcomer who had no intention of joining them, but stubbornly worked on primitive movements further. The newbies didn't understand why the guy was wasting his time in the training room when everyone was there to hunt monsters. Most people thought that after awakening, his abilities would not change, so further training was not necessary. So most of them focused on killing monsters and didn't know how to develop their abilities further. Among themselves, the newcomers discussed the same guy who was waving weapons in the training hall, even though he was the weakest among them. People passing by heard talk about how that guy was personally chosen by someone from the Fan family. The guy in the suit was surprised that there were still such strange relatives in their family. Fang Chong thought that Fang Dong was becoming more and more stupid as he got older and was wasting his time. Lately, he's been followed by a new recruit who recently achieved level D and now wants to become famous. The guy knew that Fang Chun was going to marry Vanessa, so he wanted to stay close to him. He bowed to the young man, called him master, and asked him for help. The young heir was pleasantly surprised by such sycophancy and promised to put in a good word for the guy at headquarters. The young berserker was very grateful to his new master and said that he treated him like a father. All this time in the training room, our hero suggested practicing the same final blow. After some time, he brought his mastery of the last type of weapon to the maximum level and stopped. As a reward for this, he received an inner strength skill that increased his stats by 25%. Thanks to this, the boy could use his willpower to inflict greater damage on the target with the weapon he had mastered. This was the very skill his teacher had spoken of, so the hero was eager to try it out in battle. The hero went into the duel room with everyone else and saw for the first time the portal to the combat zone, which looked quite impressive. However, he noticed that the senior mentor did not allow just anyone inside. The portal to the combat zone is intended exclusively for those who have achieved level D and above. Everyone gathered felt it was unfair that they could not use the portal just because of their rank. However, rules are rules, so preference was given to those who were more talented. The main rule of this world was built on the principle that the strongest survives. Awakened high rank can pass to better levels of the dungeon, get more valuable resources. In every group or guild, 90% of the loot always goes to the top and most capable. During this time, the weak can only act as support, covering their backs or while being crushed like ants during guild wars. Therefore, the master advised to blame only fate for one's weakness and take what is given. Tony didn't like the fact that people with low levels were left to accept that they were losers. So our hero stepped forward and said that a person's strength is not determined by rank alone. The master didn't like this, and the guys started arguing among themselves, but they were suddenly interrupted. A hand from one of those who had entered earlier emerged from the huge portal. The guy noticed that they needed help, for which they promised a reward. The guys needed a few volunteers, and our hero volunteered to do so. The awakened one did not ask any more questions and simply asked if anyone else was going to join them. Several people volunteered to help clear the dungeon, after which they went inside the portal. It wasn't a real dungeon, just a simulated D-level dungeon. However, the boss of this dungeon was too strong because he possessed not only combat skills, but also magic. In addition to the strong boss, small demons kept appearing continuously, getting in the way and getting in the way. Berserker's partners tried to persuade him to retreat and not take so many risks. However, the boy remembered that Fang Chong had promised to make him a captain if he completed this mission. That is why the guy did not want to give up and run away, but continued to fight the monster. The boss of this dungeon was too strong even for him, but Berserker had no intention of retreating. The guy used his last strength to repel the monster's attacks and hoped that help would come to them soon. He even sent another man to check where the first one who went for help had gone. Just at this time, our company had just entered the portal and found itself in a dungeon. Tony and the other recruits were inside the simulation for the first time and were impressed by the environment. It was an underground city for combat training that created a deadly aura. The guys needed to hurry to help those who were fighting the main boss. At this time, Berserker could not withstand the onslaught of the huge monster and flew back. During the fight, he had dropped his weapon and was now lying on the ground completely unprotected. But just at that moment, help arrived and the guy was able to breathe a sigh of relief. However, he glanced at his assistants and immediately recognized among them the same weakling who had been endlessly practicing his blows. However, there was nothing to do, so Berserker ordered some of the guys to surround the monster and distract it. He ordered our hero and another weak mage to remain in the cordon and cleanse the lower demons. Our hero's partner looked completely frightened and had absolutely no idea what he should do. Then one of the older recruits shouted at him and said that the guys should attack the monsters in any way available to them. However, Tony noted that these demons do not attack them unless they themselves show hostility. That's why he immediately drew his weapon, which attracted the attention of one of the demons. It was a huge monster in a black cloak who immediately rushed at our hero. However, the guy was waiting for this in order to test his new abilities. It was quite a difficult opponent for a newbie, but it was time to try out the new fencing style he had mastered. The terror that the demon inspired in our hero was different from what he felt when he fought the python for the first time. Now for Tony, this demon was just an ordinary monster and nothing more. So the guy concentrated and delivered his only strong blow to the demon's shoulder. This was the first time the guy used this punch in a fight after intense training. However, the blow was not yet good enough to kill the demon the first time. So Tony continued to fight one demon after another. He struck them and each time tried to improve his skills and increase the damage. The newbie even looked at his partner and his imperturbability thought that the demon was very weak. Therefore, he believed in his own strength and decided to attack his opponent as well. The guy decided to start with one of the simple strikes and attack the demon from behind. However, this did not cause him any harm. It only made him angry and drew attention to the guy. The magician thought that the monsters were too scary, so he was afraid of him. He froze in place and began to tremble with fear at what our hero Tony saw. At the last moment, he managed to put his sword out and protect his partner from the monster's attack. The guy noticed that a monster of this level is actually not as scary as it seems at first glance. While our hero was fighting small demons, the squad leader was confronting the boss. The berserker was worried that during the entire battle, the glow of the enemy's sword did not go out. That's why he decided to summon all his strength and use his signature technique. Out of the 10,000 D-level awakened, he was the only one with this mutation. It allowed him to instantly increase his defense and power during combat. The commander and his assistants decided to attack the boss together, using their secret weapon. Meanwhile, at the other end of the dungeon, our hero was fighting another demon. He didn't like the fact that his partner was sitting uselessly on the ground and doing nothing. He ordered the boy to help him clear the dungeon, but he was too scared. Instead of helping, the boy turned around and ran to the exit of the dungeon to go home. All this happened at the same time as the main attacking team was attacking the boss. The commander did not understand why, after his strengthening, the monster was still not defeated. The guy also noted that due to fatigue, he was moving slower and slower. He even suggested that the monster's sword caused a paralysis effect on its opponent. At this moment, the commander noticed that one of the newcomers was running home. However, he couldn't do anything about it because he himself was paralyzed right in the air. It seemed like this was exactly what the dungeon boss had been waiting for all along. The commander couldn't move even when the monster's sword was rushing at him with all its might. With literally one powerful blow, the boss killed the berserker and made him disappear from the dungeon. In the dungeon, movement is automatically triggered after the subject receives a fatal blow. The subordinates started to run after they saw that the strongest of them had been defeated. The first among them was the very same newcomer who volunteered to come to the rescue. He ran out of the dungeon and faced the disapproving looks of his comrades. Only in the training room the guy was able to breathe calmly and tried to catch his breath from running fast. He raised his head and saw in front of him the commander who had just fought the main boss. Berserker's assistants believed that their defeat was the fault of the newcomer, so they decided to beat him up. The guy tried to justify himself by saying that he was simply afraid of ghosts and did not expect this. The commander saw how his charges protected him, so he believed their words. The guy couldn't admit that he lost because of his weakness, so he ordered the culprit to be beaten. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, our hero was left alone and continued to fight the monsters. He defeated one demon after another, practicing the power of his blows. After some time, he didn't notice that he had cleared out all the lower-level demons. Only then did he notice that only the boss remained in the dungeon, and his partner had disappeared. The guy noticed that the boss's health was significantly reduced. He couldn't watch his partners leave without finishing what they started. So the hero decided to fight the boss on his own to bring the health bar to 0. Thanks to the system, the young man could see all the characteristics of this monster, its weak points. Only now did the guy admit that the system was not entirely useless and often helped him. The first thing he decided to do was to use his signature punch, which he had been practicing before. However, the monster easily blocked his attack and threw the guy back. The hero noted that the most important thing is to not let the monster paralyze his body. Tony saw this battle as a great opportunity to fully master his new ability. He applied the additional features of the protective gloves and rushed into battle. Meanwhile, in the training hall, the newcomers continued to beat up the poor magician. Several guys held him by the arms, and the squad leader hit him in the face and body. The guy sincerely believed that if he hadn't been distracted by this guy, he would have been able to defeat the boss. Some in the crowd tried to object, but their mouths were quickly shut so as not to become next. Despite the fact that there were people with abilities among the crowd, none of them dared to stop the commander and confront the strong. This went on for some time until the silence in the training room was suddenly interrupted by someone's loud scream. Everyone present turned their attention to the place from which it came. It was our hero who emerged from the portal and accused the commander of taking advantage of his position. Our hero ordered the captain to blame only himself for his failures. The newcomers were surprised that such a weakling would allow himself to insult one of the strongest. After our hero's words, the berserker became furious and dropped his victim. The young magician was already unconscious and fell like a stone onto the cold floor. At this time, Berserker and his assistants were very angry and demanded that the guy repeat his accusations. The hero was not one to be scared and happily repeated that he considered the commander a coward once again. After all, recently he was left completely alone in the dungeon and fought against the boss. Despite his fatigue and exhaustion, our hero struck the monster again and again. The boss was so strong that it completely dispelled the protective power of his gloves. The hero knew that the enemy's sword had a paralyzing effect that he would not be able to resist. That's why he had to time the final blow precisely and deliver it. However, the guy did not despair and tried to attack the monster with all his might. This was paying off because his health bar was gradually decreasing. The hero was glad that his plan was working, so he tried even harder. He tried to combine different types of attacks to make it harder for the monster to defend against them. During the fight, Tony clearly remembered the movement that his teacher performed. With each blow, the guy pumped up his skills more and more and increased his strength. After some time of their fight, the boss's health was almost at 0. This time, the young man decided to use the blow that the master delivered with an axe. He brought it down right on the monster's head, hoping to cause more damage. The guy was overjoyed to see that the boss's health bar was completely empty. However, instead of his long-awaited victory, something unexpected happened. Another monster burst out of the monster's body, which looked like a huge demon. This demon seemed to swallow our hero inside itself and poisoned him. After this, Tony immediately felt incredible pain that made him go numb. The guy remembered that internal strength skills had special conditions for activation. In order to use inner strength, a person must be on the brink of death. Our hero's body was in a terrible state. The system was sounding the alarm. After a few moments, she announced that the conditions for activating the internal force had been met. Immediately after this, the hero's attack power, defensive power were increased, and his health was fully restored. Thanks to the removal of the negative effect, Tony was able to free himself from his captivity. The guy used one of his practiced punches to break out of the cage. Using his internal energy and his blade, he seemed to cut the demon in half. Having done this, the guy landed on the ground and waited for the next attack. However, instead, a huge magic crystal landed next to him. The system announced that this was a reward for defeating the Ghost General, which gave additional skills. It allowed one to learn the skill of the afterlife swordsmanship that the boss possessed. Our hero decided to appropriate this skill, so he clenched his hand and broke the crystal to activate it. Immediately after that, a glowing aura surrounded him, which gradually fed into his body. Then inscriptions in a language unknown to him appeared around the hero, which gradually disappeared. Immediately after this, the hero opened the skills window to check what he had achieved thanks to this victory. The boy was disappointed that after all these tests, he had only advanced his beginner's fencing skills by 10%. That's why he was so angry and decided to provoke the escaped commander. The berserker couldn't stand such humiliation, so he rushed to attack the newcomer. However, our hero easily dodged all of his blows, making the guy look like a fool. This only further angered the commander, who became more accurate in his strikes. At some point, Tony became so bold that he decided to block him. The guy easily stopped the commander's fist and squeezed it so hard that it caused him pain. Berserker didn't understand why this newbie had such enormous power. Immediately after this, the guys went their separate ways and decided to attack each other. Berserker didn't want to show his weakness and fear, so he decided not to retreat during this fight. However, they were suddenly distracted by someone's ringing voice, which rang out throughout the entire training hall. The guys who had been fighting each other before suddenly froze and looked around. It was Vanessa, accompanied by her bodyguards, who came and asked who gave them permission to have a showdown here. In fact, some time ago, the fan family's employees were monitoring what was happening through surveillance cameras. One of the guys noticed how a weak newbie defeated the dungeon boss. However, he pretended that nothing had happened so that his colleagues would not see it. The guy thought that there was some kind of error in the data because the newbie couldn't handle the Ghost General. That's why the guy decided to delete and restart the program so that no one would know about it. However, no one noticed that the dungeon behind the fighters suddenly closed because everyone was busy. Vanessa asked if the boys knew what consequences there would be for fighting in the recruit training area. However, the senior master decided to intervene in the conversation and asked what the girl was doing here. The recruits were very impressed by their mistress's incredible appearance. The girl couldn't believe that the newcomers decided to start a fight right in front of their boss. She noticed the beaten guy and asked what happened here. The master tried to make it look like the guy was too weak and got hurt during training. That is why the girl ordered one of her bodyguards to examine the young man. She also ordered the doctors from among the newcomers to provide first aid to the boy. The girl didn't believe that the guy could get such injuries in a dungeon simulator. The magician wanted to thank his mistress, but the healer ordered him to remain silent. After some time, the bodyguard returned and told the girl what really happened. Vanessa was disappointed that the senior master dared to lie to her face. The girl believed that she was responsible for the actions of the newcomers who belonged to the fan family. She was shocked that the strong awakened dared to poison the weaker ones. She also scolded everyone who had gathered for watching and not trying to help their comrade. Vanessa was angry that after such actions, people would not be able to trust their comrades in the future. It was because of this that Vanessa decided to exclude Berserker from the training group. The squad leader could not believe that he would be expelled from the squad because of this incident. The senior master tried to protect the boy because he was one of the best students among all the newcomers. However, the girl noticed that the master had no right to stand up for the boy because he allowed the students to fight and lied. Immediately after this, the bodyguards grabbed the two expelled men and dragged them towards the exit. Vanessa felt she had done a good job as the future head of the family. The newcomers were impressed by how majestic, noble, and beautiful their heiress was. Suddenly, the girl turned her attention to our hero, who also took part in the fight. She approached the guy and asked if he remembered their meeting near the university. However, Tony looked so scared that he couldn't say anything. The girl believed that he was behaving this way because of his inappropriate behavior in the past. She hoped that the guy would bow down to her as an apology for that incident. However, this hero called her clothes disgusting and asked her not to come so close to him. These words pierced the girl to the very heart and greatly surprised the others. Vanessa got angry after her boyfriend said that her shirt was not symmetrical and was different colors. The bodyguards noticed that their mistress was angry every time she met this guy. Suddenly, another guy who had not been there before intervened in the conversation between these two. Fang Chong brought Berserker back and told him not to throw him out just because of a fight. The newcomers were surprised that this guy could talk so freely with the heiress. Vanessa noticed that the squad leader was bullying the others, so she can't let him stay. However, Chun said that he accepted this guy into his team and would now personally take on his education. He put his hand on the girl's shoulder and asked her to let him deal with it himself. Vanessa felt uncomfortable, so she pushed his hand off her shoulder. The guy suggested that the victim take revenge on his offender and beat him up in return. Immediately after this, he turned his attention to the little guy who had been sitting on the floor all this time. However, he began to refuse, knowing full well that he would get into trouble for this in the future. Tony realized that this was a good move, because no one would dare to hit the commander and the matter would have to be hushed up. This is what happened because Fan Chun proposed to consider the conflict settled. However, our hero was not satisfied with this, so he volunteered to hit instead of the victim. The commander reminded that our hero is the guy who was personally chosen by Master Fan Dong. Chun noted that this was wrong because the commander did not touch him. However, Tony responded that he simply wanted to end their battle and determine the winner. He suggested that the loser leave the training camp, which caused concern in Vanessa. The guy still couldn't look at his boss because her appearance irritated him. Fan Chong watched their interaction and began to get extremely angry at how close they seemed. That's why he allowed the fight to continue and ordered Berserker to hit with all his might. The battle of the newcomers began and all the spectators were amazed that our hero was not inferior to anyone in strength. The commander and Tony continued to attack each other with equal force. Berserker was annoyed that this upstart newbie was so strong. He was extremely angry that the hero had forced him to take extreme measures. Immediately after this, the guy called upon his power and decided to use a special attack. She allowed him to move several times faster, but it was not enough. Even his increased strength did not help the guy overcome our hero. Tony successfully avoided all of his attacks and still remained upright on his feet. The guy looked at his opponent and realized that he was going to kill him. In this case, Tony decided to try out his new ability on the enemy. Thanks to her, he could increase his strength and also inflict a paralyzing effect on the enemy. With literally one powerful blow, Tony cut his opponent's sword into several pieces. This shocked Berserker so much that he literally fell to his knees. The guy was shocked that some weak newbie was able to break his weapon. All the spectators were impressed by the abilities of this very newcomer. However, Fang Chun noticed that our hero used a special afterlife swordsmanship art, which was very strange. But the guy still admitted his protege's defeat and promised to exclude him from the squad. Immediately after this, he suggested that the newcomer take the test again to rule out any error. Tony was against it because he didn't care at all about his level. However, Vanessa convinced the guy that this would only benefit him. Fan Chun promised to enroll the hero in his sabotage squad if he was right. After some time, Tony was again lying on the table and undergoing examination. Only now it was carried out on a more precise device, which was used by the elders in the family. Fan Chun and Vanessa waited for the results that the researcher would tell them. The girl said that the guy was indeed of the lowest rank, and the equipment was in perfect working order. After these words, Fang Chong was sure that the hero was not able to defeat the Ghost General. Tony immediately realized that the machine was unable to assess his strength because of the system. Fang Chun speculated that Vanessa had deliberately changed the boss's parameters to help her protege win. So he suggested that the hero join the reconnaissance group and go into the dungeon. Today, the guy went through a simulation on the simulator. Now he was offered to visit a real dungeon. Vanessa tried to stop her friend because it was too dangerous. Tony hoped that in a real dungeon he would be able to level up his skills faster. That's why he agreed and was about to greet his new boss. However, he noticed that before shaking hands, Fang Chong stopped and pulled his glove onto his hand. Only after this did he shake our hero's hand with his gloved hand. The heir warned that the dungeon could be very dangerous and they would face difficulties. The dungeon was connected to another world from which monsters constantly emerged. The awakened killed these monsters to obtain crystals that gave them enormous power. Over the past few decades, new dungeons have been appearing all over the world. In order to gain control over a decent number of dungeons, the 4 main families gathered into special groups consisting of carefully selected people. In front of one of these portals, there was a group that belonged to the Fan family. Sabotage Squad number 18 consisted of 4 people who were waiting for their new recruit. After a while, their boss Fan Chun appeared, leading the new recruit. The boys knew that they would have a new addition to their squad, but they saw it for the first time now. Fang Chong introduced the F-rank newcomer and asked him to take care of him. Immediately after this, the guys from the squad hurried to go inside the dungeon. The squad captain was a C rank, and next to him was a D rank LAN healer. The remaining 2 awakened D ranks were also unhappy that they were given such a weak partner. The guys were afraid that in the dungeon they would have to spend a lot of time defending it. But the newcomer stepped into the portal of a real dungeon with them and froze in surprise. It was his first time seeing a real dungeon, so he was impressed by its size and appearance. The system informed the hero that he was in a level C dungeon inhabited by worms. The guy hoped that the worms would look symmetrical enough that it wouldn't hurt to look at them. The squad leader ordered the newcomer not to look around, but to concentrate on the task at hand. The guys went deep into the dungeon, gradually clearing all the passages. It was immediately obvious that they had been working together for quite a long time and in a well-coordinated manner. The healer immediately increased the health of all her comrades, after which they fought the monsters. In each of the tunnels, the boys were met with different types of worms, which they successfully killed. Tony thought that the healer accidentally forgot to apply the enhancement only to him. However, he did not want to deal with this moment and rushed to help his comrades. Each of the squad had good fighting skills and could fight monsters on their own. Sometimes there were too many monsters and dangerous situations arose. However, at such moments, the guys helped each other and covered each other's backs. The squad leader was surprised that the newcomer was not afraid of the first dungeon. The guy noticed that our hero was quite strong for a person with the weakest rank. The medic observed the situation and realized that this guy would be quite difficult to eliminate. Thanks to her abilities, the girl could control monsters for a short period of time and manage them at will. Now she used her spell on one of the monsters and forced it to submit to her will. She came up with a great idea to cause a little accident in the dungeon. Lan watched as our hero fought another worm. It was a pretty strong monster, so it wasn't that easy for the heroes to deal with it. The monster's scales were so thick that the boy's sword quickly got stuck in them. Suddenly, the hero felt a special danger coming from behind. It seemed as if the rest of the squad had been waiting for this moment and watching him. Suddenly, the monster rushed to attack its fellow with whom Tony was fighting. If the guy hadn't managed to jump back at the last moment, he could have easily ended up in that worm's place. Immediately after this, all the monsters went crazy and began to purposefully attack our hero. One of them grabbed him by the clothes, and at that moment, the second one crashed into him from behind. The team members were happy that the newbie was killed by a monster, so they wouldn't be blamed for anything. However, the healer suddenly noticed something strange in the middle of the battle. The hero used his invulnerability ability and easily stopped both monsters with his bare hands. Immediately after that, he used the skills of the afterlife sword art and created a whirlwind that spun the monsters and threw them into the air. After this, the hero delivered one precise and powerful blow, cutting the opponents in half. Thus, his battle ended and the progress of the task reached 15%. The hero didn't notice anything strange and asked if his partners had finished. Tony was surprised that in this dungeon the monsters dissolve after they die. After this, the guy suggested that his comrades move on and let them go ahead. The commander knew the way, so he went first in the middle of the group. Tony noticed that all the monsters were coming out of the nearby tunnel and suggested going there. However, the commander noticed that there were only weak monsters in that dungeon, and they needed a boss. The hero felt uneasy if they couldn't clear the dungeon completely, so he suggested going there on their own. The healer assumed that the hero noticed her attack and decided to check. In this case, the commander sent the girl after the newcomer so that she would follow him and, if possible, kill him. Lon hurried after our hero Tony and said that she would go with him. She was a magician, so she could heal the hero's wounds and help him from a distance. The guy was worried that others might need her help, but the girl reassured him. After this, the commander suggested that the remaining ones fight the boss and not delay the payment of their reward. The deeper the hero went into the tunnel, the darker and gloomier everything around became. However, his partner was able to take care of this and illuminated everything around with her magic. Now our hero could see the monsters they had to fight. They turned out to be huge cannibal ants that hunted in packs. Tony ordered the healer to illuminate everything around him, and he himself rushed into battle. He used the fastest and most accurate strikes to defeat monsters. He attacked each ant one by one, trying to completely clear the tunnel. The C-rank dungeon looked too weak after training in the D-rank dungeon. The healer watched as the lowest-ranking newcomer easily defeated the monsters. After some time, Tony killed all the ants and completed the task at 30%. It happened so quickly that the doe did not have time to come up with a reason to turn off the light in the tunnel. Therefore, the girl was forced to continue to accompany the newcomer and help him along the way. Suddenly, Tony thought that small creatures could be hiding in the extensions and stuck his hand in there. He asked the girl to help him look around, which made her even more suspicious. So gradually, they moved further and further, clearing the dungeon by 60%. Half an hour later, they emerged on the opposite side of the tunnel and reached the cliff. Tony only completed 60% of the quest, so he thought there should have been more monsters in this place. At that moment, a great idea came to the doctor's mind about how she could get rid of her partner. The girl quietly approached him and suddenly pushed him in the back. Tony didn't expect such betrayal from his new partner at all. The girl asked to blame not her, but their master, whom the hero had upset earlier. The doe believed that the guy would not survive after falling into such a deep hole, so she calmly went back to her partners. However, our hero was not so weak and managed to stick his sword into the crevice during the fall. He was angry at Fan Chong, who ordered his men to kill him. The guy fell quite deep, so he couldn't see anything around him. He needed to get out when suddenly the hero noticed a strange light below. He decided to go down a little lower and began to gradually descend with the help of his sword. After some time, the guy almost reached the cave and saw strange water. The hero carefully jumped down and decided to look around. However, he quickly found out that he was not alone in this cave. The boy looked back and saw a strange monster that came out of the shadows. They turned out to be huge butterflies that were hostile to him. The system warned about the toxicity of these insects and their abilities. The guy decided to listen to these clues and activated his inner power. He used one of the skills he had recently acquired. Thanks to this, the hero was able to avoid the toxic effects of the butterflies and attack them. Thanks to his mastery of his sword, the boy was able to defeat these monsters quite quickly. Immediately after that, he completed the task by 70%. At the same second, a notification came that the dungeon boss had been defeated, and the task was 99% complete. Tony assumed that his partners had been too inattentive and had missed some kind of monster. Meanwhile, at the other end of the dungeon, the main squad was fighting the boss. They were only able to kill him with their combined efforts and take a rest. The commander ordered to collect all the magic crystals and move towards the exit. The teammates were disappointed with how low the reward was for winning and clearing this dungeon. After collecting the materials, the partners moved back to the beginning of the cave and met with their healer. The commander praised the girl for killing the rookie and completing the special assignment of their superior. And at this time, the still-living hero was thinking that he had managed to miss some monster. He diligently searched the entire dungeon but was unable to find the last monster. Suddenly, something shiny caught his eye in the middle of the pile of stones. The guy guessed that there was something under these stones, so he began to clear away the rubble. One of the corners of the altar had failed, so it was not symmetrical. The hero became interested in whether it could be repaired using the pieces that were lying nearby. Because of his illness, the hero could not stop, so he completely put the altar in order. However, our guy was also confused by the fact that the golden tray was not in the center of the altar. Tony decided to fix this right away and carefully moved it right to the center. After this, the guy could breathe a sigh of relief and noticed that the altar looked much better. Suddenly, the system announced that the conditions for opening the secret dungeon had been met. At the bottom of the cave, a huge whirlpool appeared in the water. Then the water disappeared and a secret passage opened up, beckoning our hero. Tony moved closer and carefully approached the edge of the hole. The guy looked down and hoped that the remaining 1% of monsters were waiting for him there. He gathered his thoughts and jumped inside this rift to complete the task. There, Tony met a terrifying D-rank spider queen who could shoot venom. The hero was very surprised to meet a D-rank monster in the dungeon. However, he didn't have much time to think, as the spider immediately began to attack him. Tony barely managed to dodge the web that was about to be thrown at him. Tony noticed that the monster had slow attacks, so he had a chance to win. However, quite unexpectedly, one of the monster's attacks changed its trajectory. She turned and rushed straight towards Tony, her net spread wide. The hero did not expect an attack from behind at all, so he fell into this trap. During resistance, the nets began to emit a poisonous gas that caused pain. The more the guy resisted, the more damage he took. At this time, the spider pulled her web and dragged the guy along the ground. She opened her mouth and released a stream of poisonous steam straight towards him. The system immediately notified the hero that poison had been detected in his body. It was so strong that it instantly worsened the health of our hero. At some point, the guy even suggested that he would die in this dungeon, because with every second his strength left his body and he could no longer resist. Due to the neurotoxin, the hero's body entered a semi-conscious state, and the degree of poisoning increased. Sometimes the hero would briefly come to his senses and be surprised that he was still alive. He watched as Spider dragged him across the ground to her lair. The guy noticed that there were 1,000 hungry eyes burning on the ceiling and walls around him. These were weaker monsters who were waiting for the return of their mistress. The guy guessed that the spider wanted to feed him to her children. At that moment, I remembered a conversation with my friend that took place some time ago. Even then, Lucy told him that if he encounters a poisonous substance somewhere, it means there is always an antidote nearby. If someone is poisonous, then only someone who has resistance to this poison can live next to them. That is why the hero, with all his might, launched an analysis of the environment for the presence of an antidote. The poisoning progress was almost complete when suddenly the system stumbled upon something interesting. It turned out to be ginseng, which had detoxifying properties. After collecting the grass, the hero noticed that the process of his poisoning immediately stopped. However, he did not want to reduce the effect of the poison even a little, so he immediately threw away the plant. Because of his illness, the hero wanted the poisoning scale to reach 100%. That's why he put the antidote aside and waited while the numbers changed one after another. After some time, the spider dragged him into the very depths of her lair and stopped. She gave her children an order, so many spiders went towards their prey. The poisoning progress reached 100%, after which the system began to analyze the poison. After this, the hero received permanent resistance to this type of poison, and all his powers were restored. Tony immediately abruptly picked off the ginseng leaves that were next to him. The guy crushed them in his hand to speed up the detoxification process. Then after that, the guy got to his feet and grabbed his favorite weapon. He began to kill the small spiders one by one to completely clear the dungeon. This enraged the spider, who watched the death of her children. The monster couldn't come to terms with this, so she immediately began to attack our hero. However, Tony knew exactly who he was fighting, so he avoided all of her attacks. Only now the guy didn't just dodge, but immediately stopped attempts to tie him up. He knew that when fighting such huge monsters, he could reduce the reach of their attacks by fighting at close range. That's why the guy tried to get as close to the monster as possible. The spider roared in rage because she couldn't kill this guy. Tony moved closer and closer to the monster, avoiding its attacks, and thought about his next step. He remembered that the place where the web is stored is always the most vulnerable for insects. This was the spider's most vulnerable spot, so Tony cut her body. Immediately after this, the guy ran a little to the side and began to observe the monster's reaction. The spider roared from unbearable pain and became even more furious. She used her web-slinging ability to try to patch herself up. The monster decided to attack our hero from above, so it climbed up to the ceiling of the cave. She released another portion of extremely poisonous mucus towards the hero. However, this time our Tony easily managed to avoid a direct hit. He also rushed towards the ginseng thickets that were around him. The guy picked a little of the plant and kept it in his fist for future use. Unfortunately, the hero got distracted and didn't notice how one of the small spiders bit him on the leg. Because of the boss fight, he completely forgot about her 1,000 little children. Seeing this attitude towards her cubs, the spider became even more furious. Out of anger, the monster went into its berserker form and became even stronger. This was the first time Tony had fought a monster that had several different forms. Now the spider could attack much faster, and her strength was also increased. However, the sequence of her attacks itself hardly changed, so it didn't bother Tony much. The guy tried to attack the monster with his internal energy again, but his attacks bounced off. His strongest skill didn't work, so the hero had to dodge again. Eventually, he found himself surrounded on all sides and could move no further. Only now did Tony realize that the monster had thought this moment through from the very beginning. For the first time in his life, he encountered a truly intelligent monster. Our hero was extremely upset that he didn't think to cut the web right away. Now, if he starts cutting it up mindlessly, things will definitely get even worse. The spider was incredibly happy that she had managed to lure this man into her web. Now she could try to kill him as quickly as possible and avenge her children. The monster spat out another whole bunch of slime in the direction of our hero, Tony. However, the guy expected this scenario and used the plant. After destroying the sprouts, the hero received approximately 30 seconds of resistance to any poison. He decided to take advantage of this time and tried to attack the spider. The monster resisted, and the hero had to use his inner strength skills to cut through her web. He followed through with his attack and plunged his sword straight into the monster's unarmored belly. He twisted his sword and released a stream of internal energy, directing it towards the enemy. This was enough to cause irreparable damage to the monster. Gradually, the web began to sag and break, and the monster fell apart. Immediately after this, Tony landed gently on the ground and watched as the monster disappeared. Then the hero looked around and saw small spiders begging him for mercy. However, the guy came to the dungeon precisely to destroy every single monster. After the fight, Tony was happy that the real fight had greatly improved his skills. Suddenly, the system announced that it had received a hidden reward, which was a piece of a puzzle. It was one small piece of a puzzle shaped like a jigsaw puzzle. Tony didn't want to deal with collecting the fragments, so he threw it back over his shoulder. However, suddenly, the puzzle unfolded on its own and entered the system. Tony noticed that an image of the entire painting appeared in front of him. The guy was angry because the system was constantly making his life more difficult with new tasks. He was extremely irritated by his illness and screamed with rage. Energy fluctuations have appeared in portals all over the world, triggered by the appearance of a fragment of the god's bone. The most powerful worlds all felt that something was about to happen. Fang Chun listened to his group's report on how they went into the dungeon. The doctor assured that they had clearly completed the special task they had been given. The boss was pleased and promised that a big reward awaited the girl. He approached her and said that he could do absolutely anything she asked. The girl was embarrassed by his behavior and said that she would be glad of any reward that the master offered her. The rest of the team preferred to pretend not to notice the strange communication. Fan Chun ordered the boys to leave the bill so that he could transfer their reward to them later. He also ordered them to pretend to be unhappy about the loss of their partner when they were around other people. Immediately after this, the squad went to the evaluation hall to hand over the found artifacts. The team laid out all the materials they had obtained in front of the appraiser and waited for the final sum to be announced. The commission's information stated that the team consisted of 5 people, so the girl inquired about the presence of a 5th. The team began to cry over the fact that they had lost their weakest partner in battle. The evaluator was confused by the fact that people expressed their emotions so strongly, although this happens almost every day. She was about to name the final amount to the team when suddenly someone else appeared. It was our hero, Tony, who said he had a few more crystals. Everyone on the team was terribly surprised by his appearance, especially the doctor. The guy immediately realized that he had already been exposed as a dead man in front of the appraiser. The girl didn't care what was going on inside the group, so she ordered everyone to be quiet. Immediately after that, Tony came closer and poured out some crystals from his bag. This was made possible by a special ring that allowed for the storage of countless items. The girl was amazed that this one guy had carried more crystals than the entire previous group combined. At this time, a meeting was taking place in the Fan family's conference room. It was finished, so the secretary bowed to the boss and announced the end. However, the man asked to tell the girl that an abnormally high revenue had been recorded today. Fan Chun jumped up when he heard that they were talking about the very dungeon that Tony had gone to. It was announced that one newcomer had single-handedly brought in 500,000 worth of magic crystals. The head of the Fan family was surprised that his successor reacted so strangely to this name. The guys decided not to show their cards for now and pretended that nothing had happened. One of the masters noted that Tony was one of the capable newcomers that Vanessa had recruited. The girl explained that he studied with her at the same school and she invited him to a study group. Fang Chun scolded Tony for leaving the team without permission and refusing to obey orders. However, the master stood up for his student, who was very diligent and assiduous in his lessons. Fang Chong was annoyed that some pathetic master dared to contradict him. The secretary noted that the profit was within the normal range. It was a small exception, which ruled out the possibility of robbery. Thus, the head of the family realized that the boy was a gifted person, despite his low rank. In this case, the chief decided to instruct Vanessa to invite this young man to the permanent assault group unit. Fang Chong was annoyed that his group couldn't even complete such a simple task and kill the guy. The head of the family noticed that his successor was behaving strangely and drew the attention of others to this. However, the guy stubbornly denied everything, although he hoped to take revenge on the master. A few days later, our hero was sitting in his classes at the university. The boy didn't understand why everyone around him, even teachers, were paying increased attention to him. This continued all day, even when he was walking home with his girlfriend in the evening. Lucy was worried that her friend had been missing for some time, but he reassured her. The girl even suggested that it was because the guy had joined the Fan family. Tony denied everything, so Lucy decided not to press him and wait until he told her everything himself. The boys were walking down the street when they suddenly heard a scream from one of the alleys. They saw a whole crowd of adults beating up some guy. The young people immediately realized that they were simply making fun of the unfortunate man. Lucy immediately decided not to pass by and stop the beating. The girl shouted that it was unfair for a whole crowd to attack one person. This made the bandit very angry, and he was about to hit the girl. However, he didn't have time to do this because Tony defended his girlfriend first. He ordered everyone to get out, because only cowards would beat up the weak. The young people looked at the guy and immediately recognized him as the famous newcomer. They decided not to mess with the famous guy and just run away. Lucy immediately reached out to the victim and offered to take him to the hospital. However, suddenly the guy jumped up and said that now he had a bodyguard, so he was safe. He continued to shout after the fleeing offenders, while Lucy and Tony stood silently. They realized that the guy was completely fine, so they decided to just leave. When the unfortunate man finished screaming and turned around to thank his rescuers, they were no longer there. The friends went for a walk further around the city, after some time bumping into their new acquaintance. It was the same beaten guy who now organized Tony's fan club. The young man screamed about how Tony saved him and gave his offenders a hard time. The guys passing by laughed at their classmate because Tony was too weak to become his fan. The others agreed with him because the lowest wounds are the weakest among the awakened. Tony was also unhappy with this incident, so he rushed towards the guy. He slammed his hands down on the makeshift counter and broke it. The young man was frightened by the enormous power of his idol and stepped back. Tony couldn't believe that a stranger was trying to recruit people to a group dedicated to him. The hero scolded the stranger for ruining his social life. However, the guy noticed that his heroism yesterday was capable of changing the world. Tony was not happy and ordered the guy to get out and never see him again. Rumors have already spread throughout the university that our hero has his own club. Even Lucy's classmates began to pester her with these stories during her studies. In fact, the girl sincerely believed that this was not such a bad idea. After the awakened ones appeared, not all of them began to use their power for good, so it was dangerous. In the alley, they had already started discussing the fact that a newcomer had appeared at the university and was putting together his own group. They were bandits who intended to rob a man who was dressed quite expensively. The man was scared and promised to pay the hooligans well if they let him go. However, one of the attackers responded that they were not going to steal his money. The second one replied that they just liked to hear the rich people scream when they killed them. The awakened were about to harm a random passerby when someone appeared from above. A stranger in a black cloak jumped from the roof and lowered the boys' heads into the ground. It was a beautiful girl who immediately drew attention to the victim. The girl called herself a guardian, a king who protects ordinary people from hunters. It turned out to be Lucy, who dropped her trademark sign on the ground next to the victim. Tony lay on his bed and couldn't believe what had happened to him recently. Quite unexpectedly, the young man's phone rang, breaking the silence. It was a message from a guy in his group inviting him to go into the dungeon again. The senior master of the Fang family's training center headed towards his car. The man felt that there was someone behind him, but he did not have time to react to it in any way. It turned out to be Fan Dong with a knife in his hand who had come to take revenge for the confrontation at the meeting. The guy easily killed the master and left his trademark next to his body. After some time, a reconnaissance group arrived at the scene, accompanied by a family. Lab technicians revealed that they found a special card next to the victim's body. A few days later, our hero came to the Fan family's assessment center again. He agreed to go underground with the guys again, although he refused for a long time at first. His partners were not happy to see him because the mission's failure had caused them to lose their reward. The team leader recommended that the hero go with the squad into the dungeon. Tony decided to test his abilities and went with them into the portal. A few moments later, all the guys came out of the portal in a completely different place. Immediately after appearing in this world, the system issued a task to destroy all the monsters in the dungeon. Not far from them, the ground began to shake and mounds appeared from under the sand. The squad leader ordered everyone to prepare for an imminent meeting with the monsters. Several mages summoned their power and tried to attack the worms. Thanks to the magic circles, they were able to bind them and make them freeze in place. Then the second part summoned a fire ointment and tried to burn the monsters. Tony was impressed that they were able to clear 20% of the dungeon in such a short period of time. The chief said that his squad would move on, and the supply team should collect more loot. Tony remained standing and watched as the battle mages advanced forward. After a couple of minutes, they had made significant progress in clearing the dungeon. The supply team literally couldn't keep up with them to collect all the crystals. After some time, the battle team reached the monster with the rank. They used their standard set of spells, immobilizing and attacking the monster. Tony was impressed that the mages were able to change the weather and summon lightning at will. A few moments later, a deafening bolt of lightning pierced the monster's body. Immediately after this, the boss was defeated and the dungeon was officially considered cleared. Immediately after this, everyone started discussing how they wanted to get home as soon as possible and rest. However, Tony noted that the dungeon was only 99% cleared. The guy looked down and saw one monster in the form of a huge turtle. He drew his sword and asked permission to kill this monster himself. The squad leader said that the turtle had too much defense even for this rank, and the magic crystals from it were practically worthless. The magicians noted that the monsters had high defense, but they did not attack at all. Tony didn't believe their words about the strength of the turtle, so he decided to check it out for himself. He was impressed that after just a couple of hits, his hands started shaking. The squad leader was pleased with the guy's behavior, but decided to let himself deal with the turtle. Our hero began to attack the monster again and again without causing any harm. After several hours, Tony still had not managed to inflict a single wound on this monster. The hero closed his eyes and tried to think of a tool that could help him. Then Tony decided to try to channel his energy in the form of a chainsaw and chop up the turtle. Tony remembered that he had already seen a similar technique from his master. The guy concentrated hard and then delivered one perfect blow. It was only at this moment that he noticed that he had finally been able to inflict some damage on the monster. Tony was incredibly happy that he finally managed to do it. Thus passed several long hours of endless and weak attempts. During all this time, the hero only managed to deepen the scratch on the monster's skin a little. The young man began to get tired, so he decided to try to change tactics. He rained his perfect blows down on the monster's torso over and over again. In total, during this time, our hero attacked the turtle about 99 times. Now the guy raised his sword above his head and prepared to strike for the 100th time. This perfect blow proved to be shocking and allowed our hero to knock off the monster's head. The monster's body disappeared, and the guy received as a reward from the system the ability to instantly restore his stamina level once a day. Also, thanks to his efforts, he was able to increase his sword skills by a whole level. After Tony received the title of judge from the system, his powers increased many times. In 2 weeks, he managed to complete several level dungeons, after which he became even stronger.